This is HTC 1S Take Apart Repair Guide brought to you by Repairers Universe. The first step we're going to do when disassembling this 1S is to power off the device. Once that has been done, we're going to need to remove this upper cover, which is actually missing from this device in particular. You'll just need to use a little bit of upward pressure to remove that. This lower cover will then need to be removed. You can do this by using a safe open pry tool. Just get your pry tool in between the seam of the cover and the housing. Once you get your safe open pry in between the seam, it should be easily popped off, as it's just held in place with a few clips. We'll then have a total of 6 screws to remove. These first 4 will be small Phillips. Once these have been removed, there will be 2 more Torx T5 screws. Take note that removing these screws can be a little bit difficult as they normally get stuck. If that is the case, simply use a pair of tweezers or something similar to lift them out. We can now use the safe open pry tool to pry in between this seam, between the screen and the back housing. Do this on both sides. Once the clips are released, this full device should come apart from the back housing fairly easily. Be sure to angle it in the correct orientation and remove it. With the motherboard exposed, first step we're going to do is remove the battery. To do this, simply use a safe open pry tool to gently lift the battery connection. The battery itself is held in with a small bit of adhesive. We're going to use a nylon spudger right here and gently lift up on the adhesive, being very careful not to bend the battery itself, but just release the adhesive holding it in place. Take your time with this and be sure not to bend or damage the battery. Once the adhesive has been released, you can put that off to the side until reassembly. We now have 2 small Phillips screws that need to be removed from the motherboard. Alright, now with those 2 screws removed, we can use the safe open pry tool to begin lifting this plastic cover covering the camera and motherboard. Be careful as it is held in place with quite a few clips and you do not want to damage these clips. Gently work your way across all sides until each clip is released. Now that we have this cover removed, we now have 4 connections that need to be released. All 4 of these will be jaw connectors. Simply lift the back tab and release the cable inside the connection. This final connection will be for the antenna. Just simply press up on this using your safe open pry tool. The motherboard can now be lifted and removed. Main tab holding in the motherboard will be located in top right. Be careful with this when you're prying this out. The motherboard now removed, we can use a safe open pry tool and gently lift this volume flex cable connector, which is adhered to the side of the housing. Simply use your safe open pry tool and lift up, being careful not to rip the cable. We can now heat the front assembly using a heat gun or a hair dryer. Be sure to remove this flex cable or move it off to the side when you're heating the back of the screen assembly, we're going to want to heat both the front and the back using about medium heat for about 30 to 45 seconds, and do the same with the front. Be careful not to overheat the plastic and melt it. Now that the adhesive is properly warmed, we're going to want to use a safe open pry tool, or in this case we're using a nylon spudger, to gently bend back the housing, just giving us a small little grip with our pry tool in between the front housing and the touchscreen. The 1S uses quite a bit of adhesive at the top and bottom, so using a second pry tool is very much suggested, allowing you to hold position with one and release adhesive with the other. Take your time with this process, and be sure not to damage any of the flex cables, especially near the bottom of the device. We suggest staying with top until you are able to separate like this here in the video. Once that is done, we're going to use a pry tool to just kind of slice at the bottom, making sure that the soft key buttons, the LED buttons, are going to be released with the housing and not with the screen assembly. As always, be sure to apply more heat if the adhesive becomes too strong. As you can see here, we're able to separate the bottom of the touchscreen from the front housing without the LED flex cable being attached to the touchscreen. Once you do this, you can finish cutting the rest of the adhesive and remove the screen assembly from the front housing. From here, you can then clean up the adhesive and replace the screen assembly.